As the Democratic Party faces growing discontent from its own base, Zohran Mamdani's insurgent run for New York City mayor is testing whether democratic socialism can energize working people. So is this the future of the Democratic Party? Or will the establishment shut it down? This week on UpFront, I'll ask Briahna Joy Gray, journalist and former Bernie Sanders press secretary. Briahna Joy Gray, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
It's my pleasure.
On October 18th, 7 million people across the United States took to the streets. It was the No Kings protest, a nationwide show of resistance to Donald Trump's administration and his power. There were speakers from, I won't say across the spectrum, they were kind of on the same spectrum, but it was Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, even Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson was there. He actually called for a nationwide general strike. He declared, "If my ancestors as slaves could lead the greatest general strike in this country's history, we can do the same today." Do you believe that mass protests like this one kind of work in this day?
I mean, frankly, no. When you're in a position where you're protesting in a preordained protest zone that has been permitted and allowed and permitted by the government, where the leaders and organizers of the protest are bragging about the fact that it's non-disruptive, that it was not disruptive, you have to ask yourself who this was supposed to persuade, what it was supposed to do. And I think that Mayor Johnson's evocation of a general strike caught fire the way it did, precisely because counter to the trend of these No Kings protests, he's saying that we need to do something that would actually grind the gears of the economy to a halt. We need to do something that is disruptive to the means of production. We need to be able to have boycotts at shipping facilities that are actually sending bombs to places that we don't want to send bombs to, that actually imperil the Trump's government in ways that it would have to stop, recognize, and change course on if it wanted to stop. These No Kings protests, they begin to feel, and this is not a commentary on the people who participate in them, but it begins to feel like an opportunity for folks who are legitimately frustrated to let off some steam. And I think we should be asking ourselves questions about whether or not we want people to let off steam rather than to direct the steam into an engine that could actually affect change.
Is it possible to do it in those steam-letting spaces? Like, in other words, if you get 7 million people who are just ticked off, and even though they don't have a plan of action, even though they're not ready to do a radical disruption of the status quo, if you get them in the room and you get the right voices, then the general strikes come, then the political education comes, then the urgency gets reinforced to them.
Yeah, you can definitely use them as opportunities to organize. And I saw a number of leftist groups saying, we're going to get people to sign up for stuff with clipboards. I saw pro-Palestine activists who were largely excluded from the official workings of these protests try to use the No Kings marches as opportunities to galvanize people around that particular cause. And I think that's a good idea. And of course, the general strike speech is another opportunity to exploit those protests. But the protests in and of themselves and the way they're being framed by the Democratic Party and the people who put them together as sort of a means to an end or a demonstration of just how much everybody dislikes Trump, it falls flat.
On November 4th, New York is going to be heading to the polls to choose their next mayor. And there's one candidate, Zohran Mamdani, who is really shaking things up. He's running on a democratic socialist platform. He's talking about rent freezes, free public transit, universal health care, and taxing the rich to pay for all of it. Many inside of his own party, the Democratic Party, say that he's too far left. Others say he represents the kind of working class politics that Democrats have long abandoned, and that they need that kind of democratic vision to take on Trump. What do you make of it?
Zohran Mamdani is too good for the Democratic Party, really, and they don't deserve him. And it's very ironic that the leaders of the Democratic Party, who also happen to be New York State leadership, don't understand the good thing that's been bestowed upon them. They're very much looking a gift horse in the mouth. But
what do you mean by that when you say they don't deserve him? One could argue that's exactly what they not only deserve, but desperately need.
Oh, they need him, but he's too good for the party. Why do I say that? I say that because at the end of the day, the party has made its priorities clear, and its priorities aren't winning above all. Despite the emphasis on Trump's authoritarianism and how legitimately bad it has been since he has been president the second time around, especially, they have been presented with opportunities repeatedly to, one, prevent Trump from having been elected in 2016, to prevent Trump from having to been elected in 2024, and to offer more legitimate resistance to him in this moment. And they choose not to, because what it would require for them to actually win and to beat Trump is to be a more anti-establishment candidate than Donald Trump. And they are unwilling to do that. So Zohran Mamdani, frankly, is not even his policy prescriptions are not even that radical. Free buses in the richest city, in the richest country in the world, give me a break. Come on, yeah.
And have the richest people pay for it.
And have the richest people pay for it. Taxing, again, this population that has, I think, the largest concentration of millionaires and billionaires on the entire planet, it should be a no-brainer. A rent freeze, it should be a no-brainer.
But if it's that easy, in terms of accepting it, right? It's not, like you said, it's not that extreme. It's popular. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to pay lower rent, who doesn't want the free bus, etc. At least,
I know a couple of people, and they're all billionaires.
Fair enough.
Backing Cuomo.
Right. But in terms of everyday people, this is what they want.
Yeah. But this is the fundamental issue with the Democratic Party. It's the money. It's follow the money. It's the money that talks. And this is a party, and the Democrats are not unique in this. We have two corporate parties in this country that both substantially take money from the same corporate interest groups that are unified behind ideas like the real estate lobby, the health insurance lobbies, the military-industrial complex. And so you're not going to get a lot of difference of opinion, a little diversity of political opinion on those big-ticket issues. And what you have is two parties that have distinguished themselves from each other on identity and cultural issues because there's no real money at play in that. Everyone's happy to fight over, trans people become a political football, DEI becomes a political football, because at the end of the day, whether or not the NYPD parade has a pride flag on it or not costs zero people $0. What their interest is in protecting property, real estate, rents. What their interest is in protecting the wealthiest people in the world who are living in New York City from having any increase in their taxes.
So would it be accurate to say that the Democratic Party would rather lose every election to keep the status quo than to win on these issues that Mamdani
100%. And there's no clear demonstration of this, then I'm sorry, the 2024 election in Gaza. Kamala Harris has now admitted this in her book, but we didn't need her to tell you about it. There were polls that were out over the summer of last year that showed that she could win in 3 swing states if she backed an arms embargo. She declined to do so. And in fact, if you recall, after she became the nominee, there was a 3-week period where she was riding the wave of high public opinion just because she wasn't Biden. Everyone was just sort of relieved that they didn't have to deal with another disastrous debate performance from Joe Biden. But she was doing no media. And it seemed like there was almost an acknowledgement from her campaign that once she started opening her mouth, she might lose the goodwill that had come to her from just being not Biden. But the one thing during that 3 weeks of media silence that her team was sure to make clear was that she was not breaking from Biden on Israel and that she absolutely would not support an arms embargo. That was a choice. And it's not in retrospect, oh gosh, maybe if I had done a little better on Gaza. She wouldn't even lie about Gaza and a ceasefire the way that Donald Trump was willing to do. And you can debate whether or not you think any of the ceasefires that have emerged under Trump, these impermanent ceasefires and the one that we're technically in now, during which dozens and dozens of Palestinians have been killed in violation of the ceasefire, count as ceasefires. But at least he was willing to present himself as the pro-ceasefire, anti-war, America First candidate. And all you have to do is look like the more anti-establishment candidate than your opponent.
Speaking of anti-establishment, we're living in a moment where dissent is being punished. The National Guard has been deployed in U.S. cities. Immigration enforcement is carried out through mass raids. Some people are calling Donald Trump's policies unprecedented, but you've made a different argument. You've said that this is not just about Donald Trump. How do you see this chapter in the broader kind of political story?
Much of what Donald Trump is doing was loudly signaled in Project 2025. And if we want to be even more historical with our scope, the entire trajectory of the Republican Party over the last 50 years or so were loudly signaled by what is known as the Powell Memo, where soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, then working for Philip Morris, penned this memo that was a blueprint for Republicans to reclaim prominence in the United States after decades of successful left movements, from the labor movements in the 30s and 40s to the civil rights movements in the 50s and 60s to the women's liberations movement and gay rights movements in the 60s and 70s. They looked around and said, oh my gosh, we're losing the plot. What are we going to do? And part of it was the takeover of the court via the Federalist Society, picking and cultivating ideologically from law school on up people who were going to have a free enterprise mindset in the court, and who would maybe even throw you a couple of bones on cultural issues in the court, right?
Yeah.
As Lewis Powell did, he was perceived to be relatively moderate because he would, be a tie-breaking vote on an issue like affirmative action. But when you look at the decisions that relate to corporations, again and again, consistently, you get these pro-corporate decisions that anticipate and then come to fruition in Citizens United. So what we're seeing under Trump is in some ways unique because of the severity of it, but in some ways has been a long time coming. And Democrats, to their credit, did wave this red flag about 2025 in the lead up to this election. But again, we come back to the point I was making just a few moments ago, which is if you understood that this was coming, and if you understood that this longer plan has been in the works for 50 years or so, why has there not been any counterinsurgency effort from the Democratic Party? Why don't we have a legitimate resistance party to push back against it? And I would argue that the answer is the same free enterprise-minded corporate interests that funded that project are also funding the Democratic Party. Look around at all of the billionaires that we now are considered to be right-wing and Trump supporting. Elon Musk used to be a Dem guy. Jeff Bezos used to be a Dem guy. All of these people Mark Zuckerberg, I'm old enough to remember when all the good liberals graduating with me from college wanted to work for Facebook, and we all loved, maybe not me, but like everyone loved Mark Zuckerberg. It was liberal coded tech, generally speaking. California, all of this was liberal coded institutions. But they followed the money and they follow power, and none of it was ever ideological in the way that liberals tend to focus on.
You talk about liberals and liberalism a lot. In fact, you've called it a moral void.
Did I say that?
Yeah. And you said many times that Democrats are negligent and that they're just not standing for anything. I guess my question is, why do you see Democratic politics or liberalism at large as a moral failure, as opposed to a series of bad choices or compromises? In other words, you're not just saying they're wrong. You're saying something far more serious about their kind of ethical and moral composition.
I guess I am. I think that it is dishonest, something stronger than dishonest, immoral, to understand the threat and to purport to be a resistance party that is distinguished from your opponent because of your investment in the well-being of historically marginalized groups and poor and working class people, and to be ready to gamble those interests away, those individuals away, under the pretense of compromise.
But again, you're assuming they're being disingenuous as opposed to...
Here's why.
Yeah.
I say it's a pretense because the Zohran example is instructive. There is a left populist economic path to electoral success. Zohran is writing that path. You don't need to become Liz Cheney to win. And in fact, Liz Cheney is not exactly winning in politics. And bear-hugging Liz Cheney did not turn out so well for Kamala Harris in terms of ginning up votes. Certainly trotting her out to Dearborn, Michigan does not seem like a very wise choice in retrospect.
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, are Democrats really so empty-headed? Are they just so goofy and silly and mistaken that they don't realize that 88% of Democrats support a policy like Medicare for all, and they just decline to run on it because oopsie daisy, they didn't realize? Did they not realize that Israel's actions, the genocide in Palestine, is wildly unpopular, that we're living for the first time in the United States of America in a country that is more sympathetic toward Palestinians than Israelis, despite the overwhelming pro-Israel slant of the mainstream news? But, oh no, we think it's a good idea for Kamala Harris to continue Joe Biden's bear hug Bibi policy? And they didn't realize that? Or were there interests that are more persuasive to the Democratic Party groups, if you will, which is a term that's often used to derisively describe like working class, people-centered groups, environmental groups, good groups. But all of these lobbying groups and these groups whose interests are antithetical to the interests of the people are what's really driving the Democratic choice. And so when you hear about compromise and you have to be a center party and you have to be pragmatic in order to win, that's all propaganda to justify why they won't just run on legitimately popular policies like universal health care, like taxing the rich, like a $15 minimum wage. Really basic stuff here.
As we talk about sort of collapsing these left-right divides, we now see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, fascinating person. Sometimes when she's talking, she sounds a little bit like an anti-war socialist. For example, she recently gave an interview where she said, the two-party system is broken. We're sending billions to Ukraine and Israel while Americans can't afford health insurance. Now, she says that, but she also thinks that Muslims are unfit for government. How do you make sense of this moment where we're starting to hear voices on the left and the right sound eerily similar at times?
Everyone has figured out that we're in a populist moment. So everybody's grabbing for language, easy populist language. I've noticed some lefty type candidates doing the same thing. John Ossoff, everyone realizes that you gotta say, it's not left-right, it's top-down, right? Like, both parties are bad. Like, everyone's figured it out. I agree with that. I say those things all the time.
But you mean it.
I mean, so this is the question. You got to ask some follow-up questions and see how deep this goes. Is it just a rhetorical shift? I was able to interview Marjorie Taylor Greene when she was on The Hills Rising a year or two ago, maybe a couple of years ago. And she was not as far down this kind of anti-war populist path as she is now, but she was definitely on her way. And she was very much critical of the war in Ukraine and the funding for the war in Ukraine. So I asked her, do you more broadly support a cut to America's military budget? And the answer was no.
Of course.
Okay. So I'm like begging journalists who have the opportunity to actually talk to her now to ask the follow-up question. If she is frustrated by how much we're spending on foreign wars when Americans don't have health care, ask her if she supports increased health care spending domestically.
Right.
Do you support universal health care? What, in lieu of that, do you actually support to bring down health care costs for Americans? If she has no answer, it's the bluster that you think it is. And the same goes for some of the liberal candidates that are also adopting this language. I need specifics.
I mean, as you've pointed out, neither the so-called left and the so-called right are particularly reliable politically. You've taken considerable heat and paid a lot of professional costs for your positions. How do you hold that together?
Look, I was a lawyer before this, and I didn't leave the law and become a journalist because I wanted a pay raise.
That's true.
So, to me, it feels very much like I was driven in this direction because I have ideological commitments, and I want my life to be something more than long. I think that's from Pippin. But so I don't know that I have a choice. Do I fantasize sometimes about going to Hollywood and becoming a screenwriter and just doing something creative that doesn't involve any of this? So you don't have to sell out, but you can do something for yourself. Sure. Do I watch more reality TV that is healthy for a person my age? Yeah, 100%. But ultimately, I find being in the mix and having some influence to be less frustrating than being a lawyer sitting on the sidelines watching the media completely mischaracterize and misunderstand the Bernie movement of 2016, for instance. I mean, that was the moment that drove me into freelancing and moving in this direction and entering politics. So I am grateful and I am heartened by the fact that there is an audience of people that is receptive to these arguments. I have found an enormous amount of community. I don't feel like I have a minority position. What's frustrating is, in fact, that we have the majority position, but that we are being effectively silenced. We are the silent majority, Yeah. And we are being effectively silenced because there is no major party in the United States that is willing to accept us and represent our views.
So it sounds like you're not going anywhere.
No. And I do think I do think that this moment where there is an enormous amount of frustration with the Democratic Party among rank and file Democrats presents opportunities for those of us who would like to see a break from the party. And short of that, the threat of a break that is sufficiently real that it actually forces Democrats to have to choose the people over their corporate commitments. I don't know that we're close to that. I don't know that the party fundamentally can ever be reformed, because I believe the purpose of it is to advance those corporate commitments. It's like, you can't, ship of Theseus an elephant into a walrus. Like, they're just two different things. You can't just change the parts out. And I am heartened by the fact that increasingly Americans seem to understand that. But people like Bernie Sanders, who are in a position to say, like, hey, I've been fighting against this party my whole life. This is why I'm an independent. Like, we tried to do it their way. I tried to run as a Democrat. I tried to work within the inside. They've demonstrated an unwillingness to go this route. We've got to do a dirty break. He's in a position to say and do that, and is declining to do so. And instead is acting in a way that I think ultimately makes him a sheepdog in getting people back into the party. And my concern about Zohran Mamdani is the same. As much as I have praised him for his incredible political skills and what he's been able to do, and the values that seem to really predate this campaign, certain retrenchments that he has made since winning the primary, despite being so far up in polls that it makes you ask the question, why? For whom is this? It makes me question whether it is possible to be within the Democratic Party and carry on legitimate left progressive values, economic populist values. And you're seeing the way he's being cowed and beaten down. Oh, yeah. There's the threat from his own police force, which de Blasio also faced for what are ultimately pretty milquetoast criticisms of the NYPD. There is the recent New York Times write-up by Esther Hirden, in which he is meeting repeatedly with what is basically a business lobby for New York City business owners, in which they believe that they have brought him in line. One of them refers to him, says something like, I think he's more of a economic populist capitalist as opposed to a democratic socialist. I'm paraphrasing, but he's really a capitalist, as they're all reassured. Now, is he just a smart politician that's saying what he needs to say to make them leave him alone? Or is he providing assurances that are compromises that are fundamentally undermining his political project? If you fundamentally believe that every billionaire is a policy failure, what is the point of sitting at a table with the billionaires? Is his role to win, kind of just to win, to show that the left can do it? Or is the greater value of his campaign and his existence demonstrating the inability for a people-centered politics to exist in a system as corrupt as the New York Democratic Party and the Democratic Party on a national level? When he chose to stand his ground on the pro-Palestine rhetoric, he taught the country, he moved the country to the left and taught them that Israel was an apartheid state. When he was asked, do you believe in Israel's right to exist? And he says, I believe in any country's right to exist that's equal and not an apartheid state, in which treats all its citizens fairly. Again, he put it on the interlocutor asking him that question to say, oh, well, I believe in an apartheid state, right? And that moment was transformative. And he has the ability to do that with the financial interest in New York, with Black Lives Matter and police violence, and on and on and on down the line. And his choice not to do so, even when he's already won the primary, is all but guaranteed to win the general election, and is so far up in polls, is an interesting one. And do I think the value of him winning supersedes, not that it's an either or, to be clear, because he's up in the polls.
Of course.
But even hypothetically, do I believe that the value of him winning is more important than that magical thing that he did to edify the entire country about who Israel is? I personally don't. Briahna Joy Gray, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront. It's my pleasure.